Arkansas boy with a lifelong plan took the oath like his old man, then turned around proud and shook his hand. L.A. kid stood right behind, took a deep breath and signed on the line, while tears streamed from his mama's eyes. They hopped right up on that Greyhound bus, swapping stories. They laughed and cussed, and they talked about the girls that they loved. They made a pact, shined up their boots, got the call before it hit the news. No clue what they were about to do. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Glenn Baker. I finished this fight hour on Tuesday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. Here we go. So we put out the little promo video yesterday for this upcoming episode. Guys, I'm going to tell you, we had about 10,000 people responding, pretty interested in this. I hope you're on today. We'll see what the numbers are when it's all said and done. But you can find us here on Facebook, X at Glenn Baker Band, Rumble at the Patriot Prayer Podcast, all those good places. I'm excited for this next guest. It's going to be the only show for the week. We're going to chill and take some time off for Thanksgiving. But, guys, sometimes opportunity just comes along. I can't even really tell you how. A buddy of mine about 2 months ago, we were talking on the phone. He's like, have you ever seen American Made? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I have. He said, well, it's on whatever I've got, Prime. And so I went and pulled it up, and I had seen it. But I went ahead and watched it. Incredible story. Of course, Tom Cruise is a great actor, but the story itself was just incredible. It was talking about kind of my home area. I grew up in northeast Oklahoma, and this story was centered around Mena, Arkansas. And, you know, just like Hollywood normally does, they tell the story that's going to get you to buy tickets, but they don't tell you the whole truth. Well, guess what? About 2 weeks ago, I had a chance to meet the young man who's the son of the star of that movie, if you will. The story when the movie was created around his dad's story. Had a chance to get to know the son. And y'all, we're going to talk about some cool stuff today. His dad was a commercial pilot, went to work and done some work for the CIA, and we're going to dig into that because I don't even know if I know the truth about that. Ended up being recruited to fly for Pablo Escobar, smuggling into the United States cocaine and stuff. End of the day, turned state's evidence in the government. Imagine this. The government turned on him. The government threw him under the bus, and his daddy ended up in 1986 being assassinated by the cartel. This is going to be quite a story. Hey, y'all pay attention. Say hello to my new friend, Aaron Seal. Aaron, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Glenn. I'm honored to be here, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, it's been a pleasure to kind of get to know you, and we've had some pretty good chats over the course of the last several weeks. I've already met some interesting people through you. A young man named Roger Reeves, man, that's a character.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking to Roger here in a couple of weeks. We're going to have him on the show as well. But we kind of got deep on some stuff, man. You and I spoke on the phone the first time, I think, about 2 hours. So let's just start at the beginning. Aaron, your daddy's name is Barry. Your mom is it Deborah or Debbie?
Deborah, but she goes by Debbie.
Okay. And you grew up in, the story said the movie was talking about Mena, but that wasn't the case. That's not really where you grew up. Tell me about your childhood. Where'd you grow up?
Okay, yeah, I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and been here most of my life. I've lived a few other places at different times, but was born here. One of three an older brother, younger sister, and then I have older half brother and two older half sisters. Dad was married a few different times, and he was assassinated when I was 9 years old here in Baton Rouge, the Salvation Army halfway house. where he was through corruption and I don't even want to say incompetent judge because he knew what he was doing, but a federal judge that whose pride got in the way, I guess, and I believe he had an evil heart, and he set my dad up to be killed in a public assassination. It was a pretty blatant display of corruption and power, and it's the only time that I'm aware of, even recently, that someone's been publicly executed because of what the United States government did inside America.
Man, there's so much leading up to that point too, but it's amazing to me. I'm one of these guys that up until about 8 years ago, I thought my government loved me, had my best interest in heart and that kind of thing. And it's a bunch of hooey, dude. But this country is still, I believe, one of the greatest countries in the world, but it's the people, not the government. This government's corrupt, and it's corrupt from the top to the bottom. So let's go back then to the Baton Rouge, and you grew up there. You were born in what year?
I was born in 1976.
You're a young whippersnapper then.
I wish.
You got a little gray in your beard too. This is not just for men. I'm allergic to just for men. So you grew up there. You knew Dad. As you got a little bit older, I guess you knew Dad was a commercial pilot because he was gone a lot. You knew he flew planes.
Yeah, I knew Dad was a pilot. We grew up, as far back as I can remember. We were living when my mom that first got married, and my brother was real young. I was real young. They get me and both still infants. We were living in a little apartment in Baton Rouge, but not long after that, we were living in a really nice house in a nice neighborhood. I noticed. I have memories noticing the change and started realizing we were a little more affluent, I just assumed Dad was a pilot. I assumed pilots made good money. He also had one of his covered businesses that he his bought and sold airplanes. It was an airplane broker all over the world, and that was one of the ways that he one of his fronts he did for the money he was making. And so I just assumed it wasn't odd for Dad to be gone a lot. He's a pilot. That's what happens. Pilots fly, and every time they have to leave, and every time Dad came back, he was always very present and very, he was such a larger than life character, and he was so loving. And when he was back, you didn't notice that he had ever been gone because the world just revolved around him, and he always came back with presents for us to surprise us. And he brought me certain dogs home before. I was a big dog lover and still am, and he had this funny saying when he'd be going to leave, we'd sometimes like, oh no, Dad, we don't want you to leave, don't leave. And he would say, well, I gotta leave. And why you gotta leave, Dad? He said, I gotta see a man about a dog. And so I was like, oh, well, Dad might come back with a dog. So I wasn't happy for him to go, and hopefully he came back with something.
Well, it's a lot of times as kids, we don't pay a whole lot of attention to what's going on around us. Sounds like you knew a little something was changing. Coming from a real small apartment to what'd you say, a middle class home?
I think he paid $350,000 for it cash back whenever.
Well, that was a little bit above middle class back in that day. Then that was doing pretty good.
And
Baton Rouge.
Yeah, we had. I did know. I did notice we had several fleets of airplanes, helicopters. 4 or 5 helicopters. 5 or 6 airplanes at least. That was just the ones that I saw. He had other. One time when he was first getting into marijuana smuggling, he had. I think they were all 3 DC-10s that he was using for that because they had to be. You had to have a bigger space for cargo with the marijuana. And my Dad had nicknamed his little fleet of planes the Marijuana Air Force. And so I did notice. I did start to notice we were a little privileged, but I just thought it was, Dad's good at what he does, and he's a pilot, and that just comes with that life.
Well, going back to as a child, and then knowing what you know now, would you say Dad was legitimate when you were in the apartment and it was commercial?
Yeah, well, I know. Yeah, I know now. I was born October 5th, 76, and I think it was right around that month. It was the first time I think he went, or may have been a year later. It was right around that time is when he made his first pot smuggling flight. So I look as I look back at it, I see Dad was married, had an ex-wife with an older half brother and half sister. At the time, my mom then had my older brother and me, so he had two infants and 2 other children he's paying for with the ex-wife, and I could see how he would. Hear the opportunity to go pick up some pot and make some good money, and I'd have done the same thing.
Do you know how that first opportunity came about, Tim? Do you know that story?
I don't remember exactly how it came about, but we went to Cartagena. No, I'm sorry, Santa Marta, Colombia, with him when we were very young. My sister had just been born. My dad was, that was Santa Marta. I learned that from Juan Pablo. He told me that that's considered the best weed in Colombia comes out of Santa Marta. Well, Dad was getting it from the mayor or governor, the mayor of the town of Santa Marta. And so we had flown down there with him one time as like a family vacation and went stayed at a hotel. We went had a big big feast at the mayor's house. And I guess I don't know if Dad was bringing him money or just we weren't bringing any pot back on that flight, but he's probably down there bringing him some money back. And so we went to meet him, and it was safe because it was the mayor and he was protected by everyone. And it was like people say a lot, when in the marijuana business, it was all it was a gentleman's game, and it was everything was done with a handshake. And then when the cocaine came around, business was no longer done with a handshake; it was done with a machine gun.
Well, yeah, times were different back then too. We start talking about the cartel and things like that started getting big. So Dad was in the marijuana business shortly after you were born. Yeah. And how long did that go along where it was just him?
It went on for about 2 years. So 77 or 78 to about 80. And I think that's when he met, Dad got arrested with a load of cocaine in Honduras. He had at sometime along the way, he just, he realized that cocaine was easier, it had ease in handling, and in his words, the ease of handling and profit structure were better with cocaine. So he got arrested in Honduras. He had a guy that had paid him to fly him back, and the guy had a suitcase of cocaine handcuffed to his wrist. And Dad was just flying the gentleman, giving him basically a taxi service. And he had the officials paid off in Honduras where he had flown through there, had done this a couple of times, I guess, with the gentleman. And during that time, the government, the administration had changed in whoever he'd paid off. And so when Dad landed, what he did was drop the guy off on a little island outside of where they were landing. And then he went and landed to refuel. And so when the new leadership had not, were not the ones who had been paid off. So they, come up to his plane and want to search it. And since the guy was sitting on on this little island with the cocaine, all they found was a machine gun in the plane with Dad, but they arrested him for that. And then they went and eventually figured out what was going on and searched the little island and found the guy with the coke. So Dad ended up in jail in Honduras for 9 months while they were gathering the money and figuring out, making the connections on who was in power now that they could pay off to have Dad released. Because he had my uncles, I think, and a couple other people. They were going to come and break him out of the jail. They were going to come down there and with a helicopter and boats to do a little rescue. But because of the charges in that country, if they weren't officially dropped when he got back to America, they would then file charges on him. So the charges in Honduras had to be officially dropped. So Dad stayed in prison for 9 months there. We went down there and visited him. He had paid off all the officials in the jail where he would, when my mom would go visit him, he would stay at the guards would bring him over to the hotel in town to the presidential suite, and my mom would be able to go visit him there. And so when we went down there, I remember because it was the first time I ever saw pigs and chickens on the beach. I just remember as a very young child, thought it was wild that the beach was covered with dead pigs and chickens running around. We'd chase them and stuff. And so going down there, Dad didn't want us to know what had happened to him. So we were told that Dad was working as a prison guard. So when we go down there to see him, we just think Dad's working at this jail as a guard. He was dressed up he paid one of them to let him wear the guard's outfit and hold a gun. And so when we get there, he looks like he's guarding the prison.
Dad was in a Honduras prison for 9 months. This makes me laugh, man, because it's all about money. It's about money and power and who you know. Yeah. The plan was his brothers or brother-in-law, whoever it was, come to break him out. But no, we probably better wait till these charges are dropped. Man, when you got those kind of options, and it sounded like it wasn't too tough on him in the Honduras prison if they were willing to give him that kind of an option to bring you guys back.
Yeah, it was nearing the end of his stay. I'm not sure. I believe he had even gotten air conditioning hooked up in the prison for everyone because they didn't have air conditioning. That was the toughest part for him. And I believe he had gotten air conditioning, paid for the system to get hooked up for all the prisoners. So he was really popular with all the other inmates as well.
Wow, that's wild to me. So bebopping along, so he's got his marijuana smuggling business. Well, and
the prison in Honduras the trip to Honduras is where everything changed as far as getting into deeper stuff. It was on the flight home from that trip is where he met Roger Reeves. When he finally was released, he's flying on a plane home, and you'll hear this from Roger. When he sits on the plane, Roger happened to be with his wife and kids They had just flown down there to looking to buy a ranch somewhere in South America, and Roger Reeves happened to be on the plane, and there was one open seat, and my dad happened to sit next to Roger and his family.
Well, with that being said, and I want to jump into Roger here in a minute. When did the CIA come into play? Because I don't know that I know the truth about all this.
Yeah, I don't know if I can know exactly when. I've always been under the assumption now that Dad always had connections in the government. I mean, I don't think he was ever actually a CIA official where he cashed a paycheck from the CIA, but it's obvious
Right.
he did covert operations with him. He was the CIA asset.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my dad was a Green Beret during Vietnam. He was in the Army Reserves, and he was flying the Green Beret guys around in Southeast Asia, and so
he was more of a contractor, not an operator.
correct.
And okay, all right, making sense. So he was doing that even prior to the marijuana business.
Yeah, whenever the Vietnam War was ending, before Dad even got into marijuana smuggling, when stuff was going on over there, all the weapons and the guns being shipped back from Southeast Asia. They would load them on a plane, and Dad knew that they didn't count them. They just had to give him a plane load of entire plane load of weapons and tell him to fly them back. So he was stopping off in Mexico where machine guns are illegal and selling half the plane load or whatever to people in Mexico, and then flying back the rest of them back to America. And he was making a good little bit doing that during that time. So he was connected with the Air America. I'm sure you've heard of the CIA front airline Air America out of Southeast Asia. He was connected with all that. All the names that keep popping up in Dad's story are all guys that were CIA connected, or actually CIA officials working, that were working with the heroin smuggling operations out of Southeast Asia back then.
Well, and see, let's hit on that just a minute, because I've had several CIA guys on the show before, but none from that day and age. And let's just call this what it is. I mean, the CIA has got a black economy. They don't have a ton of money through the Congress that's going to them, but they got a dadgum buttload of money that they're doing a lot of stuff with. It's got to come from somewhere. Well, where does it come from? Yeah. Drugs, weapons. Oh, and even let's go a little deeper. I think it also involves a lot of human smuggling as well. There's a lot of corruption involved with this CIA, and it goes back for decades.
And I think a lot of the confusion, and it was even for me, when I was much younger, that the average person used to think, that there was a point in time years ago, if you said that the CIA was involved in drug smuggling and having drugs sold inside our country to fund a war, people looked at you like you're crazy. It sounded like conspiracy theory stuff. And I think the thing that people looked at, they think our government, like you said, our government's inherently good, they believe, and they wouldn't do that. And they don't understand the CIA and the DEA are different operations. They have the CIA would ask, isn't that wrong to bring drugs to? They said that's the DEA's problem. If they're so good at their job, let them deal with it. The CIA's they had a vow to stop communism, and by whatever means necessary. If they needed to sell drugs to get the money to fund communism, they either looked at that as the lesser of two evils. They're doing something for a greater good, or they just didn't care, and they were in it to also line their pockets as well, which I believe it's probably a little bit of both.
Guaranteed. And I've got a buddy, Craig Sawyer, that's been on the show several times. Craig's former SEAL Team 6. He rescues children out of sex trafficking around the country. And I've learned a lot from that young man. He's a God-fearing warrior. But he made a point to me, and I believe it probably stands, not just for child sex trafficking, but for drugs or anything else illicit that's coming into this country. You're not going to get that into this country without the cooperation of the country. If they want it stopped, baby, it's stopping now. There's enough power, enough resources to shut it down. So what you're saying, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. If they didn't want it here, it wouldn't be here, brother.
Yeah.
And then they take people like your dad, who was creative. Well, let's call it creative. He was creative. He got a plane full of weapons, and they didn't count them, so I'm gonna pop off a few of them down to Mexico. But I can't even really be mad at him for that. Would I do it? I hope I wouldn't do it, but it's pretty tempting.
If you got when you got two ex-wives and four kids to feed, it changes it.
At the end of the day, could we say Barry Seal was a criminal? I mean, I guess according to the laws of the land, could we say that we wouldn't do something of what he did? I don't know that, man, because I don't know the whole story. But everybody that I've talked to as I begin to research you and Roger and the things that have went on, nobody had a bad word to say about your dad.
No.
Everybody said he was a gentleman.
Yeah, and the dad was a very, very, very loving guy, very charismatic, charming. He was very loyal to his friends. There was, as far as the people that he knew him, friends of his, and people in the Baton Rouge community growing up. Like at his funeral, there were so many people that came up to my mom that with stories like this. My daughter didn't have the money to go through college, and your dad, your husband came and gave us the money to put my kids through school, and he wouldn't accept payment back. And a lot of people and business owners around town, that their business was failing, and dad would go and give them $50,000, which today $50,000 is not a lot of money, but in the early 80s that's about probably equivalent to like $250,000 now. And he that was kind of his number. If somebody was struggling, he'd give them $50,000, and he wouldn't allow them to pay him back. There was a firecracker stand halfway to the next parish over from here where my grandma lived, and every year when we'd pass through there for 4th of July and New Year's, we would stop in, and me and my brother could fill up one of those old brown grocery bags all the way to the top with whatever firecrackers we wanted, and as long as whatever we could fit in one bag each, that's what we could have it. And the guy never charged us for anything. And when I asked my mom years later why that was, she said that the guy's business was going under, and the dad, who was a friend of dad's, and he gave him $50,000 to so his business could survive. And the guy, insisted on paying my dad back, and my dad, wouldn't accept it. So they finally said, well, look, this is how you can pay me back. Anytime my two boys, anytime they come through here on the holidays and they want firecrackers, just let them fill up a bag of fireworks each, and that can be your way to pay me back. And just the countless stories and things like that of my dad doing something giving and generous and helping others is well, we're in the
70s and 80s, Aaron, and you're talking about $50,000. You're right. I think that number is probably 200 to 300,000 equivalent right now. But it was covered pretty easy too.
No,
marijuana was paying him, I don't know the number, but I think 10 to 20,000 a load at that time. And then, boom, Roger Reeves came into the picture.
Yeah.
Your dad just happened to sit down next to him on a plane. How about that? Yeah. Let's talk about that. What happened on that trip?
Okay, so I believe that when the plane was taking off, Roger says this. He sees my dad sitting down, and he thinks at first, this guy, he looked like some kind of federal agent or something. The way, because my dad didn't look like most South American people on the plane, or just like your average, Caucasian looking individual. He looked very distinguished, and Roger thought this. He thought maybe it was some kind of setup for someone to trying to sit by him. But then he realized that his daughter and wife had picked seats that there wasn't someone went assigned next to him, and there was one seat open, and then he sits in it. And so
Roger was already at that point a pretty.
Oh yeah, he was. I think he was looking to buy a ranch for his cocaine smuggling business for refueling, or just I think that's what he's looking for. That's another refueling spot. He was already a very successful cocaine smuggler. And so when the landing gear comes up on the plane, I think it made a certain noise, and Roger's daughter kind of got nervous, and asking him, "Well, Daddy, what's that?" And Roger said, "Oh, that's the landing gear coming up. Everything's okay." And so my dad leans over, "So you fly these things?" And Roger said, "Yeah." And they got to talking about pilot stuff, and Roger's thinking, "Oh, this just seems like some kind of setup." And so he asked my dad, where you coming from?" And he says, "Oh, I just got out of jail for I forget. I think it was 40 pounds of cocaine. I think. But he said, I just did 9 months in jail for a cocaine smuggling charge." And Roger's like, "Oh yeah, this guy's definitely set me up. He's definitely working. This ain't no way, And so Roger doesn't offer any really information past, about what he's doing. And then when they land at the New Orleans airport, we were outside at the tarmac waiting for Dad to get there. And he had been gone 9 months. Now we had seen him a couple of times when we visited, but Dad had been, he'd been gone 9 months. And so when Dad comes off the plane and he sees all of us, and we're screaming, crying, "Hey, Dad!" Running up to him, my mom, I think my grandmother was with us, and my siblings. And Roger saw the emotion, the real emotion on her face. He's like, "Man, you can't fake that. You couldn't have these young kids fake that. That's not some that can't that he has to be telling the truth. That's not some kind of police setup. There's no way you could stage all of that. So he walked over and told his wife Maury to write their name and number down on a card. And he walked up and said, nice to meet you, Submit Barry here. Hands him his number and says, give me a call. I may have some work for you. And so about a week later, my dad calls Roger up and say, I want to come out and meet with you. And Roger's, he's lived in Santa Barbara at that time. So he said, fly on out and come meet with me. And that's where the relationship began.
Okay. So that was a happenstance, man. From Roger's point of view, I think at that point, he kind of recruited and introduced your dad to some of them big boys and the big players there in South America. And one of those being, I guess, one of the top people that Roger was flying for was a man named Pablo Escobar. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah. Roger was working for the Ochoa family. The Ochoa family was really, most people look at it and they think that Pablo Escobar led the cartel. He may have taken over at some point when he was fighting with the government and all the civil war and stuff was breaking out. But the Ochoa family is who were the genesis of the Medellín Cartel, and they ran everything. And Roger was one of their pilots, and that's who my dad and they both met Escobar and probably carried loads for him. But they were working for the Ochoas.
Okay, and so your dad was actually working for Roger at the beginning, correct?
Yeah, he was working for Roger, who was working for the Ochoas. And I think Roger was paying Dad, $1.5 million a plane load, I believe it was. And I think Roger was getting $3 million, and he was paying Dad $1 million, I think.
Where were they flying that to? Was that coming into the U.S.?
Yeah, they were flying it up to when they first started. When they first were bringing it, Roger was flying it from South America up to Louisiana, to Lacombe, Louisiana, right outside of Slidell. There's a little small airport out there,
I've been to Slidell, yes, sir.
It's in Lacombe, the little city, right in the little town right next to it.
Yeah,
they were flying in there, and Roger would land there, and then my dad was in charge of offloading the plane. They loaded on the vans, and was just in charge of distributing it and getting it to the people in New Orleans, the mafia guys in New Orleans, or the cartel connections down in Miami. And then Roger, one of the trips when Roger was flying in, it was they were obviously making these plane landings at night and doing all this, and it was really dark, and it just happened to be a really, really foggy night. And that the fog coming off Lake Pontchartrain and the swamp. If you've ever been up in there at that time, or out in those marshes, you know how that is. And it was so foggy, Roger couldn't see the land in the dark at the little airport out there. So he circled around till he was about to run out of fuel, where he just had to land. And so he had to fly over to the New Orleans airport and landed at the New Orleans airport with a airplane loaded with cocaine from front to back. So he parks on the tarmac and he's just waiting. He said that it was so foggy, the airport was closed. There was no one there. It was one of the few times they actually closed the airport because of the fog. So he's sitting out there hoping no one comes up and, he's getting arrested. And right before the sun comes up, when the fog's lifting, he hurries up, cranks the plane up and takes off and gets out of there. So after that experience, he said, he was just, I'm going to get caught doing this. It's just, there's no reason for me to keep doing this. He asked my dad, Barry, would you meet me halfway and pick up the loads? And my dad was, more than eager to do it. So at that point, Roger started flying, I believe, up to Nicaragua is where he would fly up to Nicaragua, and my dad would meet him there and, swap it over to my dad's plane. And then he would fly it back and still do the distribution to
okay.
New Orleans or Miami.
Well, down the road, there becomes another pretty big connection. In fact, probably the one that's closest to my not my heart, but my brain, is where did Mena come into play for your dad? How did that all come?
Excuse me. Yeah, it's there was at some point during the Dad and Roger's relationship, Dad started bringing. He was paying off officials, and there was officials in Louisiana that he was paying off for cover at times. And at some point, he started paying off officials in Mena, Arkansas. I think because there was a lot of police agencies in Louisiana that were starting to follow Dad, or at least knew of what was going on, or trying to figure it out. So he was flying. They started taking the loads to Mena, Arkansas, and from how Roger tells it, Dad would tell him, it's going to be $50,000 extra to land in Mena with protection, and where I can't get caught. But every time my wheels of the plane touch the ground, it's going to be $50,000, and it's paid all the way to the top. So Roger was more than happy to spend the extra money to have the loads, covered like that, and no chance. Roger's thought was this, Roger, so he couldn't get in trouble. He couldn't get caught flying it from Colombia to Nicaragua because they were protected. And then if Barry can fly it from Nicaragua to Mena, Arkansas with it protected, we've got, basically a license to do this. It's, we've got a clear sailing.
Let's dig a little deeper here, Aaron. Let's tell people what Mena is, because maybe a lot of people don't know. Mena, Arkansas is a little town, I think about 800 people when I was in my 20s or 30s, if I remember right. I think I told you this. I used to fly into Mena, Arkansas. Yeah. That was after your dad had already been assassinated, so it was somewhere in the mid-90s. But I didn't know anything about your dad's story at that point. I didn't know anything. But my dad used to buy and sell airplanes, and we had a business together.
So he said.
Pretty convinced my dad was telling me the truth. And he would like pick me up. I would be running the business. Had a pretty good sized business. And I'm like, come on, boy, let's go get us a hamburger. And we jump in his little 182 and fly to Mena, Arkansas. First time. And dude, when we flew in that thing, I'm thinking a town of 800, it's going to be like every other VSO out there, small, one runway. Brother, this thing, 800 people in this town had an airport big enough to land jumbo jets. And I'm talking like 757s or 737s or whatever. I'm not a big jet guy. I don't know those numbers. But full-size commercial airplanes can land there. And there were several of them. Yeah. And I was like, what in the crap is going on for this little old hick town in northwest Arkansas, or really west Arkansas, I guess, that they can land these kind of jets. And so here I am 30-something years later talking to the man that probably that airport was built around exactly what he was doing. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, my first memories of the Mena airport, my brother and I occasionally would fly up there with Dad if Mom was needing a break from the kids, and we flew up there with him. I just knew that Dad had used an airport up there. I can still remember the hangar. Rich Mountain Aviation was the name of it, and Dad had he was using the hangars, but I didn't think it was really strange because for him to have the entire hangar, because Dad had the same thing at the airport in Baton Rouge. He kept his Learjet in at Baton Rouge, at the private airport here, Ryan Airport, all the planes were kept out. Everybody parked their plane, outside, and Dad was the only one who was able to park his Learjet inside the hangar. And so that wasn't really odd to me, for him to have the whole airport up there. I just knew Dad was he just kind of got things done like that. And
what was so odd to me is seeing like a yellow Air Hawaii plane there, and I saw those things.
Yeah.
And to this day, I don't know why they would have them there. Although I'm sure there was something going on that was not maybe on the up and up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were what they were doing there. It was Terry Reed. He's a former CIA agent, and he was actual CIA official. He worked for the agency, and he's got a great documentary called The Mena Connection. He works for the CIA, and he was introduced. He talks about he was introduced to my dad by Bill Clinton. He was assigned by Bill Clinton to my dad to help him Terry was a CIA agent, but also a very, very skilled pilot. And he was brought to Mena to help train pilots in touch and go landings and night landings and flying weapons and stuff for the war in Nicaragua. And he
that's along the line of the Contra, isn't it? The Iran-Contra stuff.
Correct. So, the Iran-Contra thing. And Terry Reeves said, "Look, I met Barry Seal from Bill Clinton, and I was assigned to him, and Terry had gotten into it because he was a patriot and was working for the CIA, and that's just a lifelong military career and CIA career, and that's what he did. And when he started noticing that there was more going on than just training Contra pilots and training, for the war effort, and there was cocaine and other things being brought back, he wanted out, and he tried to get away from everything, and the government put out shoot on sight orders on him and his wife, said that they had stolen an airplane and that they were fugitives and that they were armed and dangerous. And him and his wife fled, and they chased him all over the country for years and years and years. And Terry, through different court cases that they brought against him and his wife fighting it, they eventually were exonerated through every battle that they put up against them. And Terry's made it a lifelong mission of his to try to expose the corruption up there with the Clintons. And
see, that's some good stuff that you just said. Just because he didn't go along with their illegal plan, there's a hit put out on him, and of course, an accusation that wasn't true. I've dealt with something along that line now, Aaron. There wasn't ever a hit on me, but I spent 73 days in 2 jails in 2017 for something I didn't know had even taken place and had nothing to do with, and there was no evidence against me at all. When that happened to me, I realized when I got out, I'd lost everything. Home, car. In 73 days, I lost everything. Home, car, 80% of my business, and then my eyesight, my right eye. Yeah. And I realized we've got a form of freedom here, but it's not the freedom that I fought for. So this happened to the CIA guy, Terry. But here's something that's real important. Let me just do this. My name is Glenn Baker. I'm of sound body and mind, and I'm not suicidal.
Yeah, good idea. I'm gonna do this. Yeah, if I turn up dead in the next couple of days or weeks or whatever, I didn't kill myself either.
Yeah, no. So there's some deep stuff there, and you start talking about Bill Clinton. I was connected in Northeast Arkansas. I was in Desert Storm out of the 142nd Field Artillery out of Siloam Springs, Arkansas. Brother Bill Clinton's the one that signed my order to be deployed. So I know a little bit about the guy. But nothing to the point that Mr. Roger Reeves and your daddy knew. And I was talking with Roger the other day, and he told me a story about your dad. And it was like this. It was, imagine going into a strip joint and seeing Bill Clinton there and a guy walking in with a suitcase and handing him $1.5 million. Yeah. Your daddy paid off a former president before he was president for protection to fly this stuff in from South America. And that's just the truth, directly from somebody that was assassinated and set up to die.
And that scenario that Roger was describing is actually, that was a scene that was in one of the original scripts for the American-made movie. It was first titled Mena when they first had bought the script for it. That was a scene in the movie that they had, and as we were getting close. The movie was being made right before the 2016 election, when Trump and Hillary were going against each other, and so someone at the last minute convinced Universal Studios not to include that scene of the strip club in the final cut. And so it was.
I wonder who that could have been.
It was nixed from the movie, and the title was changed to American Made.
Right.
Mena.
Well, that's a whole other rabbit hole. But boys and girls and ladies and gentlemen, whoever's watching this, don't get it twisted. CIA is deeply involved in Hollywood. Project Mockingbird is real, y'all. Yeah. I got a lot of ties there, and most of what you see is not by accident. So just like that, I mean, they could have put the truth out there, but it was more about, let's give them a little bit of something, but we're going to only entertain them.
One of the other things I learned from Terry Reed, he says that Oliver North was also CIA, and he was my dad's CIA handler, and that Terry's got firsthand knowledge of that he's been in meetings with both of them, and that and he went by, I believe his because they use aliases, that he didn't go, when he's doing his CIA stuff, he didn't go by Oliver North. That his CIA name was John Cathy, I believe was what it was.
I've heard that name before. Didn't realize that.
Or Dan Cathy, something. John or Dan. I think John or Dan Cathy is what his alias in this is when he's doing that. So,
Aaron, probably I've never had somebody like you on my show, honestly. But when you and I spoke, the reason I brought it on is because I'm a dadgum patriot, man. I'm a warrior. I've fought for this country. I wear a different uniform now. It's usually a cowboy hat and sunglasses, but it's still, to the day I die, I will fight for this country. And people need to know that what you see is not what you get. And that's on both sides of the aisle. We're not talking about Democrat or Republican, because it's two wings of the same dadgum bird. Do I think there's some good people in government? I think there's probably a few, but most of them that go in get bought out. I had a chance to interview and get to know Allen West, Colonel Allen West, who was a great patriot man. I love him. He's a gentleman. But I asked him as he went into Congress, how did you stay out of being controlled? And he told me a real quick story, Aaron, and I'll just tell you this. He said, I'd come out of Congress, I'd be walking down the street, and they'd come up to me. The deep state would come up and say, hey, well, let us take you to the Lincoln Steakhouse, Stein. We got some stuff we want to talk to you about. And, Colonel West is an old artilleryman. He'd look at him, just smiles. I think I'm just going to walk on home to my little basement apartment down the street. I'm going to stop off and get me some Popeyes, and that's all I need. And he avoided them to the point that he wasn't bought, he wasn't blackmailed, he wasn't controlled. But I think there's very few of them like that, Aaron.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So it's important for people to understand that you're hearing stuff about the Clintons. You're hearing stuff about a lot of these people in Washington, D.C. Is everything you hear about them the truth? I don't know. But I guarantee you better be keeping your eyes open, because there is some very salacious, nasty people there. They're bought, paid for, and they're either bought by being bribed, or they're caught with their skeletons in the closet, or they're set up. It's easy to give a guy a drink, get him a drug, set him up, put him in a bedroom with a little boy or little girl, video it, and say, if you ever don't do what we're going to tell you, we're going to release this stuff. Or they're threatened, their family's threatened.
Yeah.
There's a lot. It's power and money. And your dad saw that side that, man, none of us can see. And so it's important to know, yes, Bill Clinton was bought off. Yes, it's true. Now, all this other stuff, is it true? I don't know, but I tend to believe it more than not.
Yeah.
Well, let's go from there. So your dad was then arrested by the DEA sometime in the early 80s, correct?
I think it was 84.
Okay. 84. I was a junior in high school, man. What happened from there?
So it was a conspiracy charge that he got arrested for. They didn't actually catch him with the plane with cocaine or anything on it. It was a conspiracy charge for some people that had implicated his name and some stuff. And the authorities in Louisiana really had it out for Dad, and so they weren't willing to work with him in any way. And he started working with the feds and the DA in Miami. First, they didn't want to hear what he had to say either, and he then, this is, they say he got in touch. He went and got in touch with George Bush, Vice President George Bush's organized crime division at that time. But that's what I thought. That's what I was always heard. But it seems more plausible that Dad just had connections already with through CIA and other government agencies that he had worked with most of his life off and on. And
don't forget George H.W. was in charge of the CIA in the 60s. So
exactly, and so for however it worked out, Dad, he was trying. They were trying to give him 3 life sentences, and so he just he would have went to prison for a little while if he could have done any time. He still had all his money in foreign bank accounts. But they were trying to get him with a RICO charge and continuing criminal enterprise, and they were going to throw him away with 3 life sentences. He just knew that he couldn't get out of that. So
Aaron, in your opinion, why did that take place? Because he had been working with the CIA over the years. Did some agencies get their wires crossed, or did he just somebody off? What happened?
The federal judge here in Baton Rouge, Frank Palazzolo, and the prosecutor at the time, Stan Bardwell, who Dad actually went to high school with, they didn't like him. They felt like he'd been rubbing this in their faces for years, and they weren't interested in helping him out, regardless of anything he gave them, any information and help. They were just dead set. They were gonna lock him up and throw away the key. And Dad didn't trust the authorities here for good reason. So when he started working with the DA guys in Miami, and he was giving them so much, they had no idea how much cocaine was coming into America. They had no idea. They didn't have anybody inside the cartels. They couldn't get indictments on Pablo Escobar, Ochoa, and Rodriguez Gacha. They couldn't do all that. And so
that was during the 80s cocaine wars down here in Miami, where it was crazy in Miami, Florida at that time.
Yeah, the whole skyline in Miami was built from that money, the cocaine money being deposited in banks. So they just weren't. Dad did enough undercover work with the DA agents then from Miami that that he had basically the judge down there said he had earned his freedom back because he had risked his life on so many occasions to try to make right some of the wrongs that he had done. And so they made it, they were convinced the judge was going to give him a certain amount of time. He was going to do jail time in Florida that he wasn't able to work off the entirety of the sentence that he was going to have there. And he did so much undercover work and so bravely for the government there that they decided they were going to give him probation. And so he had his attorneys work out a deal in Baton Rouge that he would get no more time in Baton Rouge than he was given in Florida. And Baton Rouge was convinced he was definitely getting time in Florida. So when it came back that he was given probation, they had already signed in the agreement that they had to give him probation as well, because they could give him no more jail time than he got. They were not believing that he was going to get not get any time. And so they were pretty mad about that. And so to circumvent that is why the federal judge here, Frank Palazzolo, made it where Dad had to be sentenced to the Salvation Army halfway house. So part of his probation was he had to report to the halfway house at I think it was 6 in the evening, and I think he couldn't leave maybe 6 to 8 in the morning. He had to be there overnight, and it was published in the paper, and it was court transcripts, and he did that too. So because he was aware, everybody was aware there was a hit out to kill Dad, and the judge, when asked about it, basically said he didn't care.
Well, there was a hit out to kill your dad at that point because he turned evidence over. He turned evidence over against
because of the pictures he took he took pictures of Pablo Escobar personally loading cocaine on his C-123 in Honduras. I'm sorry, in Nicaragua. So
them knowing there was a hit out and putting him at a certain specific place at a certain specific time was basically a death sentence for him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They call it probation, but it was a death sentence.
Yeah, and they knew that. The judge said he didn't care. The federal agents had really gotten close to my dad from Florida, and so they went to the judge when he did that and said, "Well, look, let us take custody of Barry. Instead of making him go to the halfway house, we were going to move him and us, the rest of my family. They were going to move us to a military base. I forget what it is I think it's in Pensacola, Florida. I'm not sure if it's a Navy base or there's some military base there. They were going to move us and have us live on the base as a measure of protection for Dad. And Judge Palazzolo came back and declined it. He wouldn't allow that. And even though he was going to be under the custody of, the DA from Florida, and when they asked him why, his reason was, I'm not allowing Barry Seal to move to a drug state like Florida.
So is this the judge that your dad went to high school with?
He went to high school with the prosecutor.
Okay. Man, small town USA, baby. I mean,
he probably dated the guy's girlfriend or something, back in the day. It's probably something petty,
I don't know how. Well, Baton Rouge is not huge today, but I don't know how big it was in the '80s. Probably not too big. I've dealt with some small town stuff. I get that. Never to the point of my death,
Yeah.
That's cold blooded. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, and the thing about it, there's a lot of ironies in my dad's life story. But the thing about it, the most ironic to me is that the federal judge who did all that, he ended up he turns out he was a drug addict, and he was addicted to opiates and pain pills. And the last few years that he was on the bench, they had to vacate all of his sentences for a several year period because it turns out he was doctor shopping and addicted to opiates.
Ain't it always the case, man? That's why I've got skeletons in my closet. I do, but I've got them all named, and I can open up the closet and introduce you to Billy Bob. And I've been transparent in my life, dude. That stuff that you hide is going to come back and bite you in the butt.
Yeah,
every time. So let's move on, I guess, and we need to talk about what happened to your daddy, and that was in 1986. What was the date?
February 19th, 1986.
How old were you? 11, you said?
I was 9.
9. Wow. Day that changed your life forever.
Yes.
How did you find out about it, Aaron?
On that day, for some reason, I had to stay after school that day. I'm not sure what it was for. And so my mom and dad had picked me up from school, and we stopped at little restaurant right there on Perkins Road in Baton Rouge, and we were meeting with it was an architect guy that was meeting us there because my dad and mom were looking at getting tennis courts and a pool put into the yard next, the side yard of our house. And so we just sat and ate, and I was, just listening to the adults talk about their stuff. And then at one point, my dad looks at his watch. He's like, "Oh shit, Debbie, it's close to for like 5:30. I got to get going." So he kissed me on the cheek, bye, jumps in his car, and he takes off. And my mom and I, got in her car and went to the house. So when we get there, I'm outside playing basketball with one of the guys that worked for my dad, who kind of, did work around our house. He's got Pat, and he kind of did yard work and just helped, things like that, and anything with us kids. And him and I were playing basketball, and next thing you know, my mom comes running down the sidewalk out the house, real frantic, saying, Pat, get the kids in the car. Hurry, Barry's been shot. And so, we kind of gather up, get in the car, and Pat's driving, and my mom and those kids in the car. We're driving on Perkins Road. And so Pat said, "Well, Debbie, which hospital? You didn't tell me which hospital it is. Baton Rouge has a few hospitals." So she's like, I don't know. I forgot to ask. So he pulls over to the gas station on Texaco on the corner of Perkins and Bluebonnet at the time. And Mom goes over to the payphone to call back the gentleman who had told her this. And so she still tells us, stay in the car, kids, you'll stay in the car. Well, I got out the car and was kind of listening and walking towards her. And I just heard Mom saying, is he definitely dead? Is he definitely dead? And the gentleman on the phone saying, Debbie, don't come out here. We're not at the Barry's not at a hospital. We're still at the Salvation Army, and do not come here, and do not bring your kids here. And her shoulders slumped down and hung up the phone. And she was crying and said, Aaron, get back in the car, and we got back in the car and went home. And then family and, friends there started showing up, and, it was, I realized it was real.
Wow. There's a whole lot more we can dig into, and I think I want to bring you back and do another show, and we may bring Roger on, and we're going to talk about some other stuff in a few minutes too. Let's lighten it up a little bit. It's really not light. And then we're going to come back and I want to talk about your story and how your life changed. What are you working on right now? I asked you when we got on here a while ago if there was anything you'd like to promote, and something that's going on in your life right now. What's that?
For one thing, I just started a YouTube channel where I'm going to release some things of some content related to my dad, and some if I get enough followers, I may release some home videos I have of I have some videos of some 300 kilos being dropped during the daytime down the road from here, and so it's all on video. I may put that out at some point, but the YouTube channel is at Aaron Seal Official if anybody wants to follow it. And I've got 1 or 2 videos up now, and I'll be putting more stuff up as we go. Okay. But, at Aaron Seal Official on YouTube. Yes, sir. Okay. And then something you're working on for a buddy of yours. Yeah, something that's really close to my heart. If people feel led to donate to this, I've got a good friend I've known, David Hart. I've known him for probably about 35 plus years. And about a month or so ago, David had a stroke, and it's left him paralyzed. The entire body's paralyzed, where it's something they call locked-in syndrome. I had never heard of it. The only movement he has is he can blink his eyes up and down to say yes, to communicate back yes or no when you speak to him. And I was up there Sunday to visit him for the first time, and it's exactly as everybody's described. He's completely paralyzed, and he just when he saw me, when I saw his face, he kind of gave me a little half smile. He was able to smirk a little bit, and he's using his eyes to communicate. And right, he's a really good guy, and we've got a GoFundMe going. His best friend Adam Campo, who's someone I've known same amount of time as Dave, is very honorable man, and got this set up to try to get some money for David's sister so she can care for him full time. Okay. And so the GoFundMe Save Dave. I know you got the link up there. We're trying to raise $50,000 to try to provide him some kind of life, some kind of quality of life while he's battling this. And so mostly I ask for people if they would pray for David and his family, but also if they feel led, if people would be willing to donate to the GoFundMe so we can try to help this family during this time. Okay, and I've got that link in the comments section. I'm going to scroll it here in just a moment so you can see it, but we don't have a clickable link on the screen. But I do have a clickable link in the comments section for that, and y'all can take a look at that and help this young man out. Thank you. Got to be a tough way to go when you can't. All you can do is blink your eyes. I mean, that's debilitating. So comments are there. Let me scroll the
Let me scroll the link there. It's Facebook, and there's a lot of little digits there. I'm sure it's going to be hard to copy. Take a screenshot, guys, and you can go there. But let's help this young man out and get him some care. Is there any hope for him to recover from that?
I think they said there's I forget maybe 14% or 24%, if you what Adam's telling me, is the chance to gain maybe some access usage again, and maybe his limbs, that type of thing. If he was able to move an arm or both arms again, that would be considered a miracle in recovery. If he was able to use anything at all.
Wow.
So, born a miracle from the Lord, for a full recovery.
And brother, don't call that out. So we're going to talk about that part too. We're going to talk about that. So your life changed a lot there in 1986. You don't have a daddy. Mama, I guess, is living off of what he had set aside now for a while.
Yeah.
But you had to grow up quick here.
Yeah.
Tell me about your life from that point out. Were you a choir boy? Were you a rebel? What happened?
Well, I first joined the Eagle Scouts, and then I began to travel the world helping underprivileged children. No, actually,
I would have believed it, man. I would have believed you. Had a smile.
Well, actually, when the day Dad was killed, I knew that I was raised to believe in God. We were, my dad's side of the family is Baptist, and my mom was Catholic, and we were raised. I knew enough about God that He was omnipotent and omnipresent. That God was in control of everything. He created. He knows everything from the beginning to end. He's in control, and He's all powerful. So the day Dad was killed, I was the next day I was in the yard playing with my dog, and I was just kind of internalizing everything, and I wasn't crying. I was just had this deep pain, and I remember thinking, well, God's in control of all this. So God knew when, that I would feel this pain, because God was, he made me Aaron Seal, and he knew that my dad was going to do what he did and be killed one day. And so, he didn't make me, Aaron Jones, down the street, the kid, whose dad's an accountant, and he's coming home tonight. I knew that God didn't, my dad did what he did on his own volition, but that God knew that by putting me in that family that I would experience this pain. And so I just came to the conclusion that either God didn't exist, like people said that He does, and this was all just random chance, or that it would be even worse, that God does exist and that He did this. He knew this would happen and put me here to experience this pain. So therefore He must not like me very much. And so either way, I just decided that I wanted nothing to do with God or any of that kind of lifestyle, because that's not the kind of type of God I would want to serve.
Man, you had part of it, right? But old devil twisted up the real reason.
Yeah.
He trusted you enough to put you in your body in that particular place and time, in that situation. I think folks need to pay attention to this real close. If you're going through some hell right now, here's the thing. God trusted you enough to know that you could handle it if you just lean on Him. And He's always got a plan. He's always got a plan. And He'll use that stuff that you're going through to make things better for you, to give you a purpose, to give you a mission. But the devil twisted that all up. So you started down a bad path, man.
Yeah. So I as I got a little older, I was always getting in bar fights and fighting around town and just, stuff like that, which I didn't consider that too bad. I saw that stuff as just like a sporting event, like a football game, so you get in a fight, somebody wins, somebody loses, you can shake hands afterwards and be friends. I didn't think that was all that, but I got into drugs, started using drugs and smuggling drugs myself. I was, went flying loads of cocaine, but and I got to where I was going to Mexico and bringing back a lot of pharmaceutical pills and selling them. At one time, I guess, probably 100,000 volumes a month I was importing from Mexico and selling them. And for that age, making some pretty good money. And well, during that time, the drug use was getting pretty out of control, and my personal drug use was getting to where I was, it was kind of a dark place. And I had a lot of people around me that I trusted who spoke about God in a way that seemed authentic and seemed, just different than this abstract view of God that if He even existed, that I thought that He was. And so, I remember one day I was driving down the road in my work van right before things got real dark. But it was when I realized life was starting to I could see where it's going to get out of control. And I remember crying out to God, thinking about this God and saying, if you're real, I don't even believe you're real, but if I don't know. And the issues I have with you if you are real. But I remember thinking and speaking out loud, God, if you're real and you're good, like people say, then, if you can prove that to me, then I would serve you. I would dedicate my life to that. If you were not if you're not the God that I thought that you were. And at that moment, I felt the weight of the world just lift off my shoulders. I felt this peace. I know now we describe it from Scripture as a peace that surpasses all understanding, and I didn't know those words, to articulate it like that. But that's what I felt. I felt the weight of the world just lift off of me, and the trauma and the pains that I had carried in me, they just vanished, and I felt light. My body felt light as a feather, and I just began to weep. And I just knew instantly right then that I knew two things. I knew that it was Jesus, and I knew that He was holy, and it was, I knew that I wasn't, I wish I'd like to say that I immediately after that, got my life back perfect, but it didn't. My life continued to be worse.
As a Disney story, that should have said, and he lived happily ever after.
Yeah, exactly.
And he saved the princess and all that stuff.
But the drug addiction continued to get worse, and I would think back about that moment, and I would always try to convince myself it was just kind of some kind of emotional thing. I don't know, I was really upset, and you think maybe this happens to people all the time, and I just it's just something happened to me for the first time. I didn't know, and I didn't have any friends that were that were serving God or anything like that. But so I just continued life as I had been. But I had this pesky thing that started. I all of a sudden started having a conscience that in a way that I didn't have before. I would think about like where these drugs go that I'm bringing back. Even though I've justified these are just Valiums. I don't even know why it takes those things. It's not like it's heavy drugs. It's not hurting anyone. But I began to think about who actually takes these, whose hands are they ended up in. And that's not a good thing to have when you're trying to have a business, run an organization, making money off selling drugs. And so I had to really increase my drug use to just be able to live myself doing that. And, over time, I quit selling drugs and it was just kind of strung out on for a long time. But I began to read my Bible, and I began to study Scripture, and I began to try to lean into the things of God. And, it took a long time, probably about a decade time period that, God eventually got me to where I was able to walk away from the drugs and so to some degree live a life, serving Him. I got ordained as a minister. I've had at one time I had a home church that I pastored, and I've preached in several different places in America, even traveled to Europe one time to preach. And one time I had a little inner city outreach ministry where I'd go and minister to kids in the bad areas, quote unquote, of Baton Rouge that were gangs and shootings and stuff like that. And I'd go minister to people and then try to encourage them to look at life in a different way and try to choose a different path.
Well, and that's something important for people to remember. Say hi to Scooby.
Hey, Scooby.
I'm dog sitting this weekend for my girlfriend, but that's something for people to remember. Just because you found Jesus doesn't mean everything goes away immediately in life is all hippie hoppy cool, No. He said we live in this world. We may not be of this world, but we live in this world, and troubles are going to be here. It rains on the just and the unjust. There's a lot of scripture there, but ultimately, you kept your eye on Him. Maybe you didn't dive in head first, but you kept your eye on Him. And here's the thing: scripture that's so important. You have 100 sheep, and one sheep escapes and gets lost, and the shepherd leaves the 99 to go with the one. Yeah. And Aaron, I think you're the one. Huh. He left to go pick up the one. Yeah. You got a big mission in front of you. Yeah, you got a big mission in front of you, my brother. And so there's some cool things that took place from that. Let's talk about forgiveness and what that meant and where that took you.
So in around 2008, 2009, when Facebook was kind of getting popular, that's around the time I was going out and doing a lot of inner city ministry. And it starts off, I got an inbox message from a gentleman. His name was Felix Dixon Bates Perella. And it turns out that he had worked for the cartel, and he was, I think he was more of a money transporter and laundering money for them, kind of a business associate, but, in the cartel. And my dad had actually testified against him and put him in prison. He had gotten, I think, like a 10-year sentence and had gotten out of jail and had given his life, rededicated his life to Jesus when he was in prison. And he had gotten out. I think he was working as a realtor and living in Baton Rouge area still. And he was going to a church that I actually knew the pastor of the church. And the pastor and I were pretty good friends. And he shares his story one day with the pastor that asking him, did you know who Barry Seal was? He testified against me and put me in prison and blah, 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 blah. I got my life together. And so the pastor tells me, I know his son, Aaron, and he's got I think he showed him some of my street ministry videos or something, familiarized him with me and said, I think you should reach out to him. And Felix was like, no, I could never do that. That'd be inappropriate. He's like, wouldn't do that. And then the pastor's name is Ricky Sinclair, and Brother Ricky was like, man, I really think Aaron would receive it well. He's a believer, and I think he would receive you very well. So Felix, sent me a message telling me all this on Facebook. And so it was at that moment I realized, okay, these are not just stories I grew up with, and stories that you read. And there are lives out there that were affected by my father in one way or the other, negative and positive. And with social media now, there's actual people getting out of prison who what my dad did affected them in whatever way. And these people are looks like they're going to start to cross my path, or could. And so I need to decide how I'm going to react to this. Is this something I just want to ignore? Is this something? Do I want to get angry at him for contacting me? How do I want to respond to this? And what would I be preaching when I'm out there talking to people about, and what would be the right thing to do? And so I took the opportunity. I said, well, look, I hope you could, hope you'll forgive my dad. Be willing to forgive him for what he did, for testifying against you and putting you in prison. He was, very like, oh no, Aaron, what your dad did actually saved my life. He said I was had gotten into a lot of darkness that I didn't, intend to get in, and the cartel probably would have killed me at some point anyway. What your dad did actually probably saved my life, and I definitely it helped me to get back on track and get my life back, serving God. So he was really, good with it, and so through that, he and I started to become pretty good friends, and he tragically died before I got to meet him in person of a heart attack. But that set the precedent for me of how I decided I was going to react and deal with these things if it ever came across me. Things from my dad's story that now intersecting with my life as an adult. And
it's one thing to give forgiveness. It's another thing. It's another thing to give forgiveness to somebody that's taken everything from you, and that's how this progressed, if I understand correctly.
Correct. Yeah, this was what laid the foundation for what would happen next for me.
We're running a little bit long, and I don't mind if you don't mind.
No, I'm fine.
But let's tell the folks in the rest of that part of the story. You reached out and actually went and visited in prison the men that killed your father.
Okay, so a few years after that, I actually had a friend that was in Angola, got in some trouble and was in Angola State Penitentiary, and that's where one of the hitmen was that had killed my dad. I knew that. The other two were in prison in North Louisiana. This guy Kumbamba was his nickname in the cartel. He was one of the most prolific hitmen they had. He was known for one time, walking into a bar in Miami and with a machine gun shooting up the entire bar trying to kill one person. And killed a lot. I don't know how many people he killed that day in the and they didn't get the one they wanted, but a lot of other people died that day. So this guy was a very, very seasoned individual with murder. So as I'm looking up, when I was told my friend whose name is Chad, who's in Angola, they told me that he had an email account where you could email him, and so as I'm looking up his JPay number on the prison email, I was thinking, Kumbamba, who was in prison on the name of Miguel Velez, I know he's in the same prison. I wonder if I could just look up his JPay. And I looked up Miguel Velez and found his email. And I took that opportunity. So I went ahead and emailed him and just wanted to let him know, because my thought was this, I wonder if he might not be sorry for what he did. He might not care. He might not want to hear from me. He might think it's a good thing, or he might be repentant. I don't know. But I just felt like, because in my heart, I had no ill will against him. And at the time, my mother didn't either. I can't speak for the rest of my family, but as far as my mother and I, we had long since forgiven all of them. And so I just thought about, I hope he's not at the end of it. I heard he was dying of cancer. And I was, thinking, I hope he's not at the end of his life thinking that he's not carrying some burden because of what he did to my dad, thinking that we hated him or wished ill will upon him. So I decided to email him and just let him know that there was no unforgiveness, and hope he's not carrying a burden, especially to his death of something that he did to me and my mom by killing my dad. And he responded back, and he and I became pen pals for a while, and I let him know that that a little bit of my story, and I told him that I loved him, and he reciprocated the same things back. And my mother and I got him and my mother on a telephone call one day because she had some questions she wanted to ask him, and then he passed away shortly after there of cancer. We tried to go visit him, but the warden of the jail would not allow us to. And so before he died, though, he sent an email to Bernardo Vasquez, who was in one of the other hitmen in jail in North Louisiana, Davis Wade Correctional, and letting him know that I had reached out and had forgiven them. So through that process, I went through a 4-year. I had to go through a counseling thing for the prison because you have to do that to visit. They thought I needed to go through a counseling deal to be ready to meet them. So COVID hit, it ended up being 4 years, but I ended up getting to go visit Bernardo Vasquez in Davis Wade Correctional and spend the day with him, and got to hug him and offer him forgiveness in person, and took a picture hugging him and stuff. And the thing with that is, it's he wasn't even really, he's not even really sorry for killing my dad. And I appreciate the honesty. He wouldn't say I'm sorry that I murdered Barry Seal. He felt he was just doing what his boss asked me to do, and it was the right thing to do because my dad was harming his friends. But he was sorry because he had felt so much pain when his parents had died. He said, but as a human being, I'm sorry that I played a part in taking someone's father from them. He was repentant and sorry for that, but he wasn't sorry that it was Barry Seal that he did that to. But I offered him friendship and forgiveness anyway.
Man, that's some deep stuff right there, because that's indoctrination to a deep level. Basically, he was just doing his job. You could ask warriors, the people that have been in war, SEALs, special forces, Rangers, that have killed the enemy. They would probably say the same thing. Yeah. Not sorry that I killed him. Yeah. I am probably sorry that somebody lost their son or their husband or their dad. Yeah. That's a different mentality, man. That's
yeah. I mean, from what I took from him, he said, the boss asked me to do something, I was happy to do it. It was like Escobar was like a god to him. It said 40 years later, he's still, the boss asked me to do it. I'm not sorry for that. He asked me to do it, and I did it. And one of the things that he shared was that when they were first going to do the hit, when they were told that, when they're getting information on my dad, they were told he stands for Salvation Army. They were like, well, how are we going to do this? We're not going to be able to, we're not going to do it. We're going to get caught or get killed ourselves because he's protected by an army. They thought that he was Salvation Army meant he was staying on an army base protected by soldiers. They didn't know what it was. And they thought, well, sure he is. Someone that we're trying to kill this has as much money out on him that won't kill too bad. Surely that makes sense. He's being protected by soldiers on an army base. So when they find out what the Salvation Army was, they were blown away. Like, why would they put this guy right here? There's no soldiers there. This is a facility for homeless people and stuff around that community outreach. Like they were like, well, surely they must want us to do this, or they wouldn't have put him here and put it in the paper. We thought he was protected by a battalion. Right.
Too good to be true, man. That was too easy.
So then, and then years before that, I reached out. While this process was going on in 2016, I had read online there was about a story about Pablo Escobar's son, Juan Pablo Escobar, who it turns out he's the same age as me. He was born, I think he's was born a few months after I was born. I knew Pablo Escobar had children. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't care about his. I never looked into his story. I was never into all the old narco stories and stuff. I mean, I grew up around that stuff. It wasn't something that enamored me, but I just knew he had children. And it was, I think, a New York Times or something article that was somebody posted online, and it was about talking about how Juan Pablo Escobar, what he does now, and that he travels around does public speaking, and offers peace, for forgiveness and reconciliation for what his father did, and just trying to build a bridge around all that stuff. And I thought, well, that's awfully big of him, And then I saw a documentary on Netflix. It's called Sins of My Father. I believe it was that. I think it was the title of it. But it was just in Spanish. So I had to watch it with subtitles. But it was a documentary where Juan Pablo Escobar went and met with the justice minister in Colombia who Pablo Escobar famously had killed, I think in '84. Last name was Rodrigo Lara. It was like it'd be the equivalent of having our Secretary of Defense killed here. He had the gentleman killed, and Juan Pablo had reached out to his son, and they had become friends and met and filmed a documentary about it years before. So I watched that, and I thought, well, maybe this guy he seems like he's sincere in what he's doing. So I thought, well, maybe I'll reach out to him, but I don't know anybody that knows these people. So I looked at the New York Times article I read, and I was going to try to email the author who wrote the story to see if he could connect us. But I saw on there he had listed Juan Pablo's Twitter handle. And so I got on Twitter, and he had millions of followers and stuff. I thought, man, this guy should check his messages, even if it's a real page. But I prayed one night, and then that I typed up a little message and sent it to him. And the next morning he responded right away, and I basically just told him, I think it's honorable what you're doing, and I more than most can understand how hard your life's been growing up with under the shadow of who your father was and is, and just offered him if you would like to. First, I asked him, would he be willing to forgive my father for testifying or being willing to testify against his dad, and that I offered him a hand of friendship if he wanted to accept that, and he did right away. He wanted to accept it, and he asked me would I come meet him in Mexico City, and we could talk in person. And so, after thinking about it, and most of my friends and family telling me that I'm crazy and not to get involved in that, I ended up flying to Mexico City in 2016 and meeting him, and we became really good friends, and we're still close, very close to this day.
Brother, I got to tell you, the old redneck pops up to me and says the pucker factor probably got pretty high for a minute.
I was excited about it. I knew it was the right thing to do. He's lived a life where his dad was a maniac and killed thousands and thousands of people all over, and he wasn't involved in that. He was 15 when his dad was killed, and he even became an architect at first as a trade because his dad had blown up so many buildings, he wanted to try to build some back, and that really touched me when I read that. So this is my kind of guy. He was dealt a pretty bad hand of cards, which I can relate to understanding similar cards that I was dealt in life, and he and I was saying, we're just trying to do our best with the stories that God gave us. And so, for him to go around, he does public speaking, or he goes around and in Mexico, he's really got a big following because all the kids there grow up watching the cartels and the cartel TV shows, and all the kids want to grow up and be the next Sicarios down there. And their whole life goal is to be drug smugglers. And the one they idolize the most is Pablo Escobar. And so he goes and does free speaking engagements to stadiums full of kids, trying to tell them, look, that life looks glamorous on TV, but it's not as glamorous as you think. He gives an example of one time when they were on the run and the government and the Cali cartels hunting them down, that they were saying he was staying in a little apartment. They were hiding in this apartment in a city, and directly across the street from him was a grocery store. And he had a pallet in the living room with $3 million in cash for them to use. And he said he went for a 3-day period without eating because he was too afraid to cross the street to buy bread, even though he had $3 million in cash sitting there. So he said, you see this, they glamorize the stuff in the media and on TV, but it's not, you don't romanticize it. It's not as glamorous as you think it is. And that's not a path for kids to want to aspire to go down.
It's never as glamorous as people think it is. You can ask anybody that's in the spotlight. They don't see the grind or the danger or the things that go involved, especially on the criminal element, but that's in anything. We see what we want to see.
Yeah.
I want to end with a couple of things here. I know some folks that are in Colombia, that are from Colombia, had a chance to talk to a few of them. Pablo Escobar, I think in the beginning was looked at as like a Robin Hood hero.
Yeah.
He was robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. And then something changed when the Civil War started taking place. And there was a switch that flipped. And like you said, he became kind of a lunatic, crazy.
Yeah, he was a monster. He paid to have my dad's brains blown over the sidewalk. But
yeah. Well, there's even a connection that I have. I think I told you this the other day here in South Florida. Juan Pablo's going around also asking people for forgiveness, which is kind of ironic. You two are on the same path, similar. But I've got a friend here. In fact, I've had her on my show. Her name is Debbie. She's Chinese. Was born in Venezuela. No, I'm sorry, born in Panama, raised in Venezuela and educated in Mexico. And she is a U.S. citizen now. She's been a widow for many years. Her husband died when her three boys were young. But when she was 22, she was an executive of a big company out of Venezuela and used to travel to Colombia an awful lot. And when I told her this story the other day that you and I had chatted, and I told her about Juan Pablo, her whole demeanor changed a little bit. And when she was going to Colombia during that time was in the height of the Pablo Escobar craziness. Mm-hmm. You know, she said we would go in, we'd be frisked 7 times. Go to the hotel. We couldn't leave the hotel. It was too dangerous. And be frisked 7 times on the way out. So it was just a wild time. And she had a friend who was also an executive for the same company. And this female friend of hers ended up being on the flight that Juan Pablo blew out of the air.
Pablo Escobar, yeah.
Out of all the people in the world you and I meet, you meet Juan Pablo, ask for forgiveness. I have a friend who had a very close friend that was killed by his father. What are the odds of that, man?
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
You ought to buy a copy of his book, Infraganti. The whole first chapter in the book you wrote talks about me reaching out to him and flying down there and meeting him and how that whole relationship was formed. I think she'd get a lot out of that.
I think so too. I think there's more to this story as well, though. And I want us to come back and do some other stuff together. 2 things I'd like to end this with today, Aaron. Number 1, going through what you went through in life and getting to a point where you are now. And brother, you don't have it easy. You're a caretaker for your mother who's got Alzheimer's.
Correct. Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yeah, see, and I know what that feels like. My dad died 2.5 years ago. My mom 3.5 years ago. She died from Alzheimer's, and my dad had vascular dementia. And I struggled with that because you kind of made a joke a while ago about I told my dad was buying and selling airplanes. He said that as far as you knew, and that's hilarious, especially coming from where you're coming from. But my mom and dad were actually some of the most godly people that I've ever known in my life, and I struggled with their end of life story. You know, you would think there'd be a reward. I mean, they were retired; they could just have a great life and then go to sleep and wake up in heaven. But they didn't. I had to put them in assisted living in 2017. My mom had Alzheimer's, diagnosed for 14 years. It's a rough way to go. So I understand your plight. Becoming from where you were and where you were born into, what you grew up with, what you went through as far as drugs and using and dealing and to where you are now. If you had to tell younger folks right now one thing, as a word of advice from a guy that's lived it, what would you have to say?
As far as using drugs, I don't think it's a good idea. It's not. It's something that looks like just like what Juan Pablo talks about with selling drugs. Same thing, selling them, using them. It looks glamorous, and for a while it is, and it's fun, and it can be exciting. But it always ends in death. It always ends in destruction.
Yeah.
Anything we do like that's when we submit our lives to something other than God, the end of it is not going to be good. It's not going to be beneficial. And
well, the word says for the wages of sin is death. It's not just physical death; it's eternal death. Your dad.
It always takes more from us than we sign up for.
Yeah. Well, your dad had more money than probably he ever would have needed. Heard stories, money buried everywhere, stored everywhere. I mean, all over the place. Yeah. More money than he ever needed. But at the end of his life, he was murdered in front of the Salvation Army.
And the IRS had just seized everything. Everything they could get their hands on. They'd taken everything from us.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think your dad would have said probably it wasn't worth it. No. One more thing.
Actually, my dad, and we'll have to get on this the next time. But my part of my spiritual journey, after I had my conversion, I found out a year or two later. Well, actually, and I learned this while I was in prison on something arrested in jail for something that I didn't do. And
you know about that, don't you?
I'm already getting upset with this God again because I'm like, wait, I gave my life to you a year ago, and now I'm in jail for the worst charge I've ever had, and I'm actually completely innocent for this. I'm like, this is pretty, this is this is just reinforcing what I always thought about you before. Well, during that stint in prison, I was in there with a guy who I had known previously, and I found out through him in a church he would go to his parents. My dad had actually given his life to the Lord a few months before he was assassinated. And the preacher at the church, who was a friend of his, led my dad to the Lord, and he would always preach a sermon on the thief on the cross. And when he did, he would bring up Barry Seal, because everyone in the congregation in Baton Rouge knew who that was. And he said, "No one can convince me that Barry Seal's not in heaven, because I sat in a back room of a restaurant here in Baton Rouge with Barry Seal and prayed with him and watched God move in his life. And he was even flying around with his pastor taking him to some Christian businessmen's Bible studies in Texas they went to, where my dad was shared as parts of his testimony what God was doing in his life. And then he was, that was a few months before he was assassinated. And I find this out from a fellow inmate sitting in jail in 1999. And when I heard that, I felt walls falling down in my spirit.
That's amazing to hear, man. And I'm happy to hear that, actually. That confirmation is pretty important for you as an adult.
Yes. Amen.
Let's end with this, because we've gone, I don't know, close to half an hour over. And again, I'm okay with that.
I'm sorry to be so long-winded.
No, not at all. I mean, we could go 3 hours, I think, and have plenty to talk about. Here's a tough one maybe for you. And Aaron, if it's too tough, just say, I'd rather not answer that.
Okay.
But if we could cross that divide right now, just for a moment, if there was one thing you could say to your father, what would it be?
I hope he's proud of me.
Isn't that the truth? I think I'd say the same thing to my dad.
And I believe he would be.
I think he would be too, because I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Well, my friend, I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to get in touch with Roger. I want to bring him on here in a few weeks. I want to chat with you backstage about some possibilities, but hey, there may be a chance we can do something together, and we'll see if Juan Pablo is interested in joining us.
I'll definitely ask him. Yes.
I think we can do some good for people. People need to hear these stories. They're hard to tell. They may be hard to listen to, but at the end of the day, y'all, crap happens. And it's not really in life about what happens to you. It's about what you do with what happens to you that defines your character, and it sets you on the path to greatness. Man, you got a choice. It's going to happen. Something's going to happen. But can you turn to God and say, how can you work this out for my good? Or do you want to sit around and whine and cry about it and be like the multitude and just not get anything done? At the end of the day, my friend, I'm almost 60 years old. I'm still fighting, and I want to keep fighting until the day I die.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. It says, you cannot ask God for both an easy life and a strong character. The price of each is the other. Yeah.
Well, brother, I appreciate you. Folks, go look up Aaron Seal, the real Aaron Seal. Is that right? On YouTube?
Instagram is real.aaron.seal. YouTube is at Aaron Seal Official.
At Aaron Seal Official. Instagram, real.aaron.seal. Look this guy up. Give him a follow. Shoot, I bet he would even answer a message if you asked him a question. And Aaron, stick around. I want to talk to you backstage. Y'all, I'm taking the rest of the week off. I'm gonna go get my mama's cornbread dressing recipe out. And I'm gonna be shooting up some cornbread dressing and having
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, sir. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. Join us the following week. I'll put it out my schedule. I don't know exactly who we got on Tuesday. I'm not worried about it. I'm just going to get a little bit fatter before I start getting a little bit thinner. But here's the thing I want you to know. Jesus is Lord. He loves you. And Uncle Glenn loves you too. And I will see you on the other side.
Forward, halt, left, 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 right, your left, 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 right.
Arkansas boy with a lifelong plan took the oath like his old man. then turned around, proud, shook his hand. L.A. kid stood right behind, took a deep breath and signed on the line, while tears streamed from his mama's eyes.